So the book is called Reimagining Child Soldiers in International Law and Policy. And what it strives to do is reimagine something that we all already imagine, and that is the child soldier. And when we think about child soldiers, as a starting point, the book points out that we often view child soldiers through a number of very simple images. And one image that gets a lot of traction is the image of the child soldier as a bloodthirsty, deranged killer, a young person programmed to injure and commit atrocity against others, as very dangerous, a bit of a bandit or a demon. And this image is largely circulated by states and national security actors who want to justify the use of force against young people caught up in situations of militarization, and who also, in many ways, want to justify criminal trials and retributive sanction for militarized youth who commit atrocities. Another image that's out there is propagated by a lot of international civil society, global charities, and the United Nations. And that image is the image of the child soldier as a faultless passive victim, a young person entirely incapable and unaware of how they ended up in fighting forces and having no control whatsoever over what they do in that particular context. The reality on the ground, however, is very different than the reality of images and public relations. And what I hope to do in my book is present to a global audience a lot of the actual data and information about who becomes a child soldier and why do people become child soldiers and how do people become child soldiers. And in presenting this actual information, which is much more granular, much more nuanced, much more sublime and textured and complicated and messy, but by presenting this actual data, what I hope to do is correct some of the images that we have that are too simplistic. Human rights reporting often relies on very simple messages. Simple messages are effective, they mobilize, they draw support, they acquire funding, and they get traction. And for that, simple messages need to be congratulated. On the other hand, simple messages often distort. And the public may be surprised to actually know the following. The majority of child soldiers are not young children, they are adolescents, generally between the ages of 15 and 17. The majority of child soldiers worldwide are not forcibly abducted, conscripted, or kidnapped into service. About 2/3 of all child soldiers worldwide volunteer. They become enlisted. Volunteerism can mean a lot of different things. It can mean coming forward and signing up because your family told you to do so and your community pressured you to do so, so as to defend your community against hostile forces. But it can also mean young people signing up to fight, to topple a dictatorship. Many young people signed up and joined rebel forces in Libya, for example, in the internal armed conflict that ousted Muammar Gaddafi. It can mean young people signing up to join political movements because they want to achieve a certain political goal. And this is the case in a broad variety of jurisdictions, including places on the North American continent, such as El Salvador. 40% of child soldiers worldwide are girls. The typical imagery of the child soldier, focusing on the very young child holding a weapon, or the crazed demon bandit child killing with alacrity, assumes all child soldiers are boys. Nearly half of child soldiers worldwide are girl soldiers. Child soldiering is not a problem exclusive to Africa. The largest number of child soldiers worldwide today are found in Myanmar, a country also known as Burma, and are not in rebel forces, but are actually in state armed forces. Child soldiers are found on every continent, and wherever conflict erupts, inevitably, young people become ensnared in it. Most child soldiers exit conflict or leave conflict not because they're rescued by international humanitarians. Most child soldiers leave because they escape or they abandoned the group for which they had fought. When we view all child soldiers as one generic whole, indistinguishable, interchangeable, dehumanized, and uniform, we lose sight of their great individual differences, and recognizing those individual differences is absolutely necessary after conflict to successfully reintegrate former child soldiers. A very important point for us to recognize is that only a minority, a small minority of child soldiers, even in atrocity-producing conflicts, actually engage or are implicated in the commission of acts of atrocity, like war crimes or crimes against humanity. As a result, media images of child soldiers as robots programmed to kill by malevolent commanders are true in some instances, but are not generalizable. They're not true in all instances, and they may not even be true in most instances. After conflict, however, a very pressing question remains. What do we do with the child, namely the person under the age of 18 at the time, who committed acts of genocide, crimes against humanity, or war crimes, who raped, tortured, amputated, and killed people? What do we do? The push by the United Nations and other actors to insulate and protect child soldiers from criminal trials, and the deployment of the image of the child soldier as a faultless passive victim in order to achieve this protection has, I argued, overshot its mark. It's gone too far. And what it's done is it has isolated child soldiers from other forms of justice, restorative justice, rehabilitative justice, such as truth commissions, such as traditional reintegration ceremonies, such as community service, such as the conversations that have to happen as part of post-conflict reconciliation between the victim that victimizes others and the victims of the acts of the child soldier. Victims that I have encountered find it difficult to accept that a perpetrator 3 days under the age of 18 is freed of responsibility, but a perpetrator 3 days over the age of 18 is entirely responsible. When international law draws these bright lines, it accords excessive protection to those under the line, and it comes down very hard on those over the line. Years ago, I worked as a public defender in Rwanda, in the Rwandan jails, and I represented individuals accused of genocide. Among my clients, I had 250 clients, and among them, I had a number of persons under the age of 18. At that time, Rwanda had an age of 14 as the age of criminal responsibility for genocide. And among my clients who were between the ages of 14, 15, 16, 17 on the one hand, and 18, 19, 20, and 21 on the other hand, I didn't find an amazingly stark difference. But yet, international law increasingly is moving towards this stark difference. And I understand why international law is doing it. But at the end of the day, I think we need to have a more humanistic and realistic perspective. And even though criminal justice is not the answer, if we frame everything in the language of criminal law, we lose out on the possibilities of restorative and rehabilitative justice, which is very important for communities.